Welcome to Culture Connect. My name is Audrey Ray Daniel. I'm the host. And this evening, I'd like to welcome Mary Mackey. She's a poet and a novelist. She'll be reading from her book, Sugar Zone, her collection of poems. And welcome, Mary.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. The first poem I'm going to read from Sugar Zone is called The Jaguars That Prowl Our Dreams. And I have to say that there's something you should know about it, which is that I've spent about 25 years off and on in Brazil, and I mix Portuguese and English in the poem. And before you flee, let me tell you that I write my poems intentionally not to be obscure. So you should be able to understand everything about this poem, even if you only speak English. If you speak another Latin language like Spanish, Portuguese, French, you'll get a little extra thrill with it. The first words in this poem are the major tributaries of the Amazon, and the last are names of Indian tribes that have been extinguished, killed by European incursions. They're extinct. The jaguars that prowl our dreams. Up on the Orinoco, Rio Negro, Solimões, Tocantins, Xingu, Javaré, they're drinking the bebida preta, black drink, snakevine, ayahuasca, yage, blood of the great anaconda, with the smoke of burning rainforests in their nostrils, and o gosto de ceniza, taste of ashes on their tongues. Eles está comendo, they are eating purple snails, powdered viper venom, largatas esmagadas, flowers that dye their lips the color of blood, singing of cities of blue glass and the jaguars that prowl our dreams. O que mais? What else are they seeing? O que mais? What else do they know? They're not saying. They're not telling. They're calling on the ghost tribes instead. Ghosts the Tupinimba, Tupinking, Amore, lost upriver forever, lost in the burning world. The second poem that I'm going to read is called How We Lost Solange. Needs another slight verbal footnote. Solange is a character who just walked into these poems. She might be a shaman, a priestess, a goddess, an ex-lover, a wilder side of Mary Mackey. I'm not really telling what Solange is. And this is How We Lost Solange. Oh, and there's one word you should know. Jagunço means hitman, and there are 25 words for hitman in Brazilian Portuguese. It's like Eskimos and snow. And I like jagunço because it's one of the meanest sounding words. We heard there was a price on your head, that the jagunços were after you because you'd occupied land you did not own, insulted the colonels, and drunk cachaça with handsome, slim-hipped men young enough to be your sons. They said you'd turned into a parrot and flown into the jungle, that your legs had been eaten off by termites, that the Kayapo found you, wrapped you in bark, made you whole again, and fed you bitter potions concocted from dragon's blood, milk of the ila, cat's claw, and lanahuiqui. They said you slept naked with the Coricu, Matipu, Menchiku, Nakura, Suratrumai, Warura, and Yalapiti in a promiscuous pile, refusing to say whether you preferred to have sex with men or women because the distinction made no difference. Far up the Xingu, they said, you reclined in a hammock made of human finger bones, chewing on the blue gills of phantom placos and feeding your lust with spicy stews made from piranhas and spotted cories. They said that since you left us, you'd drunk human blood, ascended above the canopy on a jacare skin, and spoken to gods so terrible not even the Arwete dared to look you in the face. We formed a rescue team and went in with helicopters and tranquilizers, hoping to get to you before the jagunços did. But you saw us coming in a dream and left on a ribbon of water and gold light, trailing your long brown hair behind you like a torn flag. In the note we found tied to the thumb of your hammock, you told us we'd never find you. You wrote that you'd taken a jaguar for a lover, sifted your flesh into the great oxbow lakes where it rains black mud, cast off the flowered husk of your body, and become a white orchid floating on dark water.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you,
Mary. When I heard you read your poetry at a poetry reading a couple of months ago, I was just so moved And I knew that, you know, I really wanted to have you on the show and hear you read some of your poetry.
Thank you.
And then, you know, when I met you and we started talking, and you're also a novelist, and you've written 6 volumes of poetry.
Mm-hmm. This one won an award, of course, yeah.
And that was the 2012 Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Award for Literary Excellence.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just such a profound book. Can you talk some more about Sugar Zone?
Sure. The Sugar Zone is that part of Brazil where sugar is grown. It's also part where the Amazon's being chopped down. People are very poorly paid. It's seasonal labor, and it's run mostly by very rich men with their own private armies. And it's a very scary place, and I've spent time there and seen riots and had people killed quite near me. And it's very, you know, it's a place of passionate contrasts. And I write it partly because I'm interested in the beauty and the lyricism and the violence of the tropics, which always combine together. It's almost like when you snorkel and you see the beautiful corals and you know there's sharks out there somewhere, you know. So those were the inspirations for the poem. And I love Portuguese. I've completely fallen in love with the language, and I've taught myself Portuguese, and it's been a real joy to me.
And the way that you use Portuguese, not only well, in your poems, and are you using them in your novels too?
I use scenes and a little Portuguese in my novels, but not as much, because a poem is more. I use Portuguese in my poems as an incantation or a chant for people who don't speak Portuguese. So they have a kind of lyrical song-like quality. Novels, prose doesn't work well with that. But I use scenes from Brazil and from some of the rituals of the Brazilian religion Candomblé, the Afro-Brazilian religion, in my novels. My novel, my most recent novel, The Widow's War, has a number of scenes in Brazil. And also, when I was at Harvard, I worked in the Ethnobotanical Museum with Richard Evans Schultes, who's one of the world's great experts on hallucinogens. And so I write a lot about the shaman qualities and the plants of the Amazon and their uses in my novels, more so than in the poetry, although I mention them in the poetry, I don't describe them in great detail. Ayahuasca, for example, appeared in that first poem, and that's used by shamans for soul vision quests in the Amazon.
And this collection of poems takes you on this really whole journey, because you have other poems that are about death and
childhood and death and automobile accidents and lovers and joy and passion. And I do see, you know, I see emotional and lyrical and political as all as in one part. I don't separate in my life or in my work the political, the spiritual, and the emotional.
That makes sense. And because it did take me on this journey. It took me on that complete journey. And it's true that there isn't a separation in our lives. I mean, we live in a time when things are happening in the United States. I think we can separate that out more, but in other countries, every day it's a combination.
It's harder, yeah. And I'm, of course, very, very interested in ecological issues, and the rainforest, the destruction of the rainforest, appears a great deal in my work, in my novels and my poetry.
And I know you have 16 novels, and your very first novel, which I'm going to kind of talk about for the moment,
Sure.
Immersion. And I think we have a cover for that. This first novel is just been reprinted. And can you talk about Immersion?
Immersion was printed I wrote it in 1968 because I had been living off and on in the jungles of Costa Rica, which at that time were so remote that they had to fly in to reprovision us at the field station if they remembered us every 2 weeks. It was 2 weeks out through the jungle, and you really couldn't get out. And I saw the forest and the beauty of the rainforest and the tropics, and I had no idea that it would be imperiled or that it would be cut down. 90% of it has now been cut down.
Mary, could you, I'm sorry to interrupt, could you read from Immersion for us?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. What you have to know about Immersion is that it's a novel about a murder, it's a murder mystery in some ways. It's about passion and heat in the tropics. It has a plot, and it's a very short novel, but it's written in a very evocative way, almost like prose poems in there. So it's very much a feeling of being totally absorbed into the jungle. The major conflicts are between a woman named Kirsten, who is feeling herself kind of blending and becoming part of the jungle, and her husband is a scientist who sees the jungle as just a place to collect specimens. And I think this conflict between the idea of the earth as real estate and the idea of the earth as a living being is seminal to all my works, all the way through up until the present. So I'm going to read a little from Immersion. Inside the cabin, behind the green nylon screen, Mark bends over the table. In his right hand, pinched between the tips of his thumb and first two fingers, he's holding a single-edged razor blade. This blade is projected onto the surfaces of the table as a short, blunt line. Mark tilts the blade, bending his fingers at the second joint, pulling the back corner, rusty along the lower edge, in toward the palm of his hand, moving it towards the mound of flesh just below his thumb. Bending closer to the bird, he flexes his wrist in a perfect semicircle, bringing the edge of the blade in contact with the body of the bird, making a narrow, precise incision along the abdomen. Turning slightly, he runs the tip between the fat and the feathers, methodically severing the bands of connective tissue. Without looking up from the bird, Mark reaches into a small unglazed bowl, removes a handful of coarse yellow powder, and throws it into the open incision. As he lifts his head, his face is suddenly illuminated, every detail exposed. A few fragments of gray down float across it, moving out of his field of vision, sucked up out of the circle of light by invisible currents. Mark bends over the table. He does not appear to notice the drifting specks of down. And shall I read one more short piece?
You know what? Let's talk. I would love it, and I'm going to have you back.
Okay.
I'd like you to talk about Travelers with No Ticket Home, your latest body of work.
My new book, Travelers with No Ticket Home, is going to be a volume of poems that's going to come out in the spring from Marshhawk Press, mini poems a lot like Sugar Zone. Immersion, however, has just come out, and it's for the first time in 40 years.
Oh, wow.
First published by Shameless Hussy Press. And it was the first feminist novel published by a second-wave feminist press, and probably the first eco-feminist novel ever published. So I'm celebrating both of these right now. And Travelers with No Ticket Home will be a kind of continuation of the sort of evocations I'm doing in Sugar Zone.
And I can't wait to read those new collections. And I have to say, I just read Immersion this last weekend, and the title couldn't be more perfect because I was indeed immersed in the jungle, in the language, in the story. It was, thank you so much for all the work that you've done, and I am looking forward to having you on the show again because I want to have you read more, and we didn't even get to talk about more about ecofeminism, so I hope that we have an opportunity to do that in the future.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to be here and talk to you, Audrey.
Thank you, Mary.